divorce coaching company, a practice where I support clients going through the divorce process, either pre, during, or post-divorce, really helping them, guide them through this process. Because I think initially everyone thinks when you go through divorce, the first call you need to make is to a lawyer, when in actual fact it should be to a divorce coach. Because I can help navigate the process in terms of what type of divorce they want, set them up with some really vetted professionals that will support them along the way, and then really think about what it is that they want moving forward, and not spend the tens of thousands of dollars that your lawyer will end up charging you right off the bat. Perfect. So I'm recording. All right. So yeah, Erik, let's talk about mediation, because I know that you are an online mediator with a company, your own company called Accord Mediation.
That's right. Yeah.
So I find that as a divorce coach, a lot of my clients come to me at the very beginning of the divorce process, and they want to figure out what the best path is for them. And I think because there's so many options out there, there's collaborative, mediation, arbitration, and then of course litigation, which everyone knows most about. How do you recommend people know about going about figuring out whether mediation is right for them and knowing what their options are?
Sure. Yeah. So I think going with a divorce coach is a great way to get started, just because it kind of lets you get the landscape of options and just think about your approach in general. And because that's the hardest part for a lot of people, I think, is it's just so overwhelming. There's so much to learn, and it feels really scary. So having someone be able to guide you through the different options and explain what kind of approach you can take is really valuable. And so if you're, once you've kind of worked with a coach a little bit to figure out what options might appeal, you can look at collaborative law, you can look at mediation. And mediation, which is what I do, is really ideal when you both are feel like you can work together, so it doesn't mean that you have to get along great, and not at all. It often gets really heated in the mediation session, and that's fine, because the mediator's there to help guide you through that and structure the process and help you if you get stuck. So you don't have to be getting along great to do mediation, not at all.
Right.
The only situation where you might not want mediation is if there's a serious power imbalance, or in some cases, if there's domestic abuse, then you may not want to do that, especially if it's in the same room. If it's in by Zoom, then that might be a different case. Different people have different perspectives on it. Some feel that it can be fine over Zoom. So if you feel like you can collaborate pretty well, except for the things you disagree on, then it's a really good option, because it keeps the parties in control. Right. And in my opinion, that's really the benefit of mediation, because you can decide what's going to work best for you and your family, and you are the experts at that, right? Sometimes people feel like they want to take the easy way out. They say, well, we'll just let the judge decide, or we'll let the attorneys handle it. And I hear that occasionally. But they don't know your situation as well as you do. So, for example, I had a judge tell me one time, she said, this is a family court judge, she said, when I have a hearing, I have a limited amount of time to understand the party's situation and make a decision. I have half an hour maybe, or maybe an hour sometimes. That's not enough time to really understand it. And so they have a much better chance in mediation of figuring out something, because they know their situation really well. She said, so, tell them they're better off in mediation. You can tell them I said that. So she was really encouraging.
So even judges say that.
Yeah, they do. Yeah. So, she was clear that she couldn't fully understand someone's situation in that short amount of time, because it does
Yeah,
take some time to work through that. And so it does take some patience as well. You know, you need to be able
sure.
to sit down, talk through stuff, and go through a few different options if you're not agreeing. But then it can be something that really works for you. And
Mhm.
the other problem with having someone decide for you, like as in litigation, is that um, most of the time when something goes to court, people are spending all the time trying to prove the other person wrong. They're trying to
Right.
say
Looking for that
what they did
emotional
wrong.
justice, right?
Yeah,
Which
exactly.
doesn't happen in court.
Exactly. Yeah. So they want that emotional justice, or maybe even revenge, and they're using the court to do that. And that's misplaced. And it's also misplaced if people think that they can just leave it up to someone else to decide everything for them. Quite often people also think that, well, the judge will see it my way. He or she
Right.
will hand out justice, and clearly he or she will see that I'm in the right. But no matter who, quote, wins, the problem is that one is likely to be pretty unhappy, and that's going to make the agreement less durable, and more likely to have disagreements in the future and conflict in the future.
Yeah, definitely. And not to mention, I think like the emotional impact and the financial damage that going all the way to court causes,
Yeah.
and maybe you can, in terms of even cost, we've heard the nightmare stories of courts costing, $500,000 to $1 million. And that's ridiculous. You're fighting over money. You're basically paying to argue. And,
Yeah.
and in terms of mediation, what is the cost benefit of going that route instead?
Sure. Yeah. Good question. Yeah. It depends on how complex your situation is and how well you work together.
Mhm.
So, but what I tell people is in general, the cost is based on, I give them an estimate of doing 2 or 3 sessions, and that's with about 2 hours each. And then the rest of the time is paperwork. So, it takes me about 5 hours to do the court paperwork. Then if you figure about 4 to 6 hours of mediation, it's going to be $2,000 roughly. That's a good amount to plan on. It's quite likely it'll be less, you
Hmm.
know.
Mhm.
But that's a pretty good average cost. And sometimes people do it in less. I've had a few people do it in one session of 2 hours. They bang out all the decisions, they're done, they're ready to go.
Yeah.
That's when it's fairly simple, and they're in agreement on a lot of things. Often they talk about it ahead of time too. So
Right.
so then I can give them that structure of making sure that they're talking through everything that should go in the court paperwork, and the things that the court paperwork doesn't ask about that often is an issue later.
Yeah.
So for example, in Vermont, there's nothing in the court paperwork that talks about the tax credits, who should claim the kids for tax credits.
Right.
And that is very frequently an issue later. So that kind of thing, I help people talk that through, think it through, come up with a plan, because then they can follow that, instead of later arguing about it and not having a decision.
Right. It's good so that they know everything up front, right? And
Yeah.
how does it work? How does it work with you? Because I know that typically people ask questions, do I need individual representation? And then we take it to mediation. Because in my own personal experience, that's sort of how mediation played out at one point for us too. We both
Yeah.
had our independent lawyers, then spent a full long day in mediation. We didn't get anywhere, so we ended up still negotiating afterwards. But what does it look like, the way that you run your mediation practice? Do people come to you with independent legal support representation, or do they come to you unrepresented, or how does it work with you?
Mhm. Yeah, in most cases, people come to me unrepresented. They a lot of them tell me that they don't want to involve attorneys because they're afraid that that's going to ratchet up conflict. So I walk them through that, and I say, you can work with an attorney. You may want representation, and you can talk this all through. And at the end, go take the paperwork to an attorney and see if he or she sees any problems that you've agreed to.
Right.
So that's and sometimes there's a misunderstanding that people think that if they go to mediation, they're going to be stuck with whatever they agree to, but that's not the case. So I tell people they're going to be most successful if they think about it as a working session, as a problem-solving session, and so then as they go through the session, they just work through a kind of a draft agreement, and they might agree to certain things in the beginning, and then later that change their minds about that as they negotiate other topics, and that's fine because you're not on the hook immediately. You really aren't guaranteeing anything until you file that court paperwork.
Right, and so it's at that point then it becomes binding. Is that right?
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So at that point you can review with an attorney and say, hey, is there anything here that you think is going to put me at a serious disadvantage? And if so, you can bring it back to the table and discuss it. So most people come unrepresented. Sometimes they have representation, and in most cases they don't have their attorney attend. And I basically encourage that, to be there without your attorney, just because the discussion really should be between the parties. And it's fine to have your attorney there. It's just going to end up costing you extra time to have the attorney there attending. And really the discussion is going to be between the two between the couple.
Right.
So there's not necessarily, in my opinion, a lot of sense in having the attorney there. Now, if you're more comfortable, or you have a pretty complex situation and you'd rather have your attorney there to bounce ideas off, that's totally fine.
Right.
And sometimes, quite often I'll have all the parties together, so both parties with their attorney. Sometimes they're in separate Zoom rooms, so they'll each have their attorney in the Zoom room, and I'll go between the rooms.
Right. So you do like a virtual shuttle in a way.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Shuttle negotiation. And I just warn people that it's going to take longer that way. But some people prefer that.
Yeah. Well, it's so interesting that you're able to do that. And I find it hopeful for couples who know that they could approach mediation if they have a fairly amicable situation and are able to communicate relatively well. And perhaps their situation isn't super complicated, that they'd be able to work through it easily. There is a way to go about it that doesn't require them to immediately lawyer up the first moment they want to separate as a couple. I think that a lot of mistakes get made at the very beginning when both parties then assume that they should just go hire a lawyer. And not to say that lawyers aren't needed for the process. Even at the end of the day, you still need that person to create the agreement that's binding, so that you do have some kind of security that both parties are going to be accountable to that agreement. But at the same time, there's so much that can be worked out that doesn't necessarily need to have that lawyer right away. That's why I love when people come to me as a divorce coach, help them navigate them through all of that stuff at the beginning, even down to collecting the documents that they need to have, without having to go back and forth using a lawyer for just those simple things. And it saves so much money. Company, a practice where I support clients going through the divorce process, either pre, during, or post-divorce, really helping them, guide them through this process. Because I think initially everyone thinks when you go through divorce, the first call you need to make is to a lawyer, when in actual fact it should be to a divorce coach. Because I can help navigate the process in terms of what type of divorce they want, set them up with some really vetted professionals that will support them along the way, and then really think about what it is that they want moving forward, and not spend the tens of thousands of dollars that your lawyer will end up charging you right off the bat. the end of the day.
Yeah.
So do you find too that your clients, or do you recommend that they come with their financial paperwork or the work of a certified financial or divorce financial advisor first, so that they have a pretty clear picture of what their assets sharing is going to look like?
Yeah, I actually don't. I suggest they go through the discussion first, just negotiating, because then it becomes pretty clear after a session or two where they disagree and where their concerns are. And at that point, it's good to bring in a CDFA and start analyzing the situation, understanding it in detail. And that could be a financial neutral, or it could be each having their own accountant or analyst, whatever they're more comfortable with. Right. But if someone's really feeling pretty scared about it and really feeling they want to have a good explanation about different possibilities ahead of time, then that's totally fine. I would recommend that if they want to do that. But when it comes down to it, if you're kind of covering a lot of different possibilities ahead of time without really knowing where you're going to disagree, it might end up being a little more overwhelming than it needs to be. Right. So people can just come in mediation. So talk about, let's say they're going to talk about spousal support and they're not agreeing on that. Then, and one person feels, well, I really need this amount of money, and this is what's typical. Then, if you find you're in disagreement about that, then at that point, go talk with the attorney, talk with the CDFA, and find out what seems to be reasonable, and then start with proposals around that and start negotiating from there.
Yeah, it's probably a good benchmark of place to start. Otherwise, it's hard to kind of figure out where the starting point is for something like that when it's financial, or when it revolves around support.
Yeah. And I also kind of recommend that regarding having representation as well. If you feel really worried, or you feel there's significant issue around power imbalance, or you're really worried about one particular aspect of the divorce, say decision making around the kids and having sole custody, then it's possible you may want to start with an attorney. That might be a good way to go to research it. However, you can also just kind of get as much background information as you can. So I always recommend that people read a book about divorce so that they understand the main factors involved, and that can kind of give you that background. Otherwise, you're paying hundreds of dollars an hour to have someone teach you that, essentially. Nothing wrong with that, but it just can save you some time and money. And so if you have that general information, then going into a mediation and talking through some possibilities, you'll understand fairly clearly after a session or two where you need to research more, and which professionals you need to work with.
Right. So do you typically have situations like that where a couple will come to you, but they really do need to go do some more legwork in their due diligence to figure out what's best for decisions for them to make?
Yeah, I would say it's not the majority of cases, because in most cases it isn't too complex. But I do have cases where there might be a lot of different assets. I also have had cases where they're not American nationals, so they have investment plans in other countries. So that adds a whole other layer of complexity. And so what I help them do is just talk through how they generally want to split up that asset, but then there's some difficult things they have to research, or unknowns, I guess I should say, unknowns about how they're going to do that. Right. And so that needs to be researched with tax advisors and the plan administrator in the other country. And so, say, can it be done this way? And I think in that case, they weren't able to do it the way they had hoped. So they had to then talk about shifting other assets instead. So there's usually a little bit of homework like that, where between sessions, where they have to research and just get more information to be able to go through the process.
Yeah, I like the process that you're presenting in terms of it's little bit by little bit, because then you can negotiate or discuss certain points, figure out where your pain points are, so to speak, or where you're stuck, and then go away and research how can, what does this look like and how can we get through this? Because traditionally a lot of mediation, you're in a room for 12 hours, almost until the first person that falls,
Yeah.
you're pushed to the point of exhaustion that you can barely even think to make rational decisions at the end of the day. And I know that that's a very traditional method that still exists quite frequently.
Mm-hmm.
I've been through that process myself. So I
Yeah.
like that you break it up. So if individuals come to your couples, and what does it look like for them? How long does it typically take for them to go through each session? And does each session only cover specific points, and then you go away and then you come back and then you finalize those points and then discuss more points? Or walk us through what that looks like.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so the first session, each one's about 2 hours, because I find that that's a good amount of time where they can get a decent amount of stuff done, but they're not drained at the end.
Yeah, especially over
'cause-
Zoom, right? That's a long time.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, exactly. That's another important factor. Yeah. So when you're doing divorce mediation over Zoom, that just the video itself can be kind of draining. So it's good to split it up for that reason. And even in person, I would limit it in most cases to 2 hours. So the first 2 hour session, I begin by giving them some background, just a kind of a high level overview of what's involved with divorce. So it's how the paperwork goes through the court process, what each step is. And then it's also talking about the major components like child support, spousal support, asset division, debt division, etc. Just so they have, if they haven't done their research, then at least they have a high level overview to understand things a little better. And once, we do that for maybe 15 or 20 minutes, answer any questions, and then kind of dive into the topics. I also ask people, if they have agenda items. Sometimes they have stuff that's top of their mind that's causing them stress. And so they say, I really want to talk about this and that and that, the schedule for the kids, that's most important. So I'll take that into account as well. And I usually ask people to start with something that they feel is going to be less contentious than some of the other items, because they've got their worries about whatever it is, maybe who's going to keep the house, and that's a big concern for some people. And understandably, with that stress and concern, they want to start with that item. But I want to see them get some experience moving through topics, having some success, coming to agreement, and that momentum, that really makes a big difference. When they start seeing that they can work together, that they're making progress, that helps for those more difficult, contentious topics.
Absolutely. I love the opening up with that. Share your little wins, get through those first, and then, realize that you can actually come to certain agreements on certain things. Get the smaller ones out of the way and then tackle the big ones.
Yeah. It just helps with a little bit more positive attitude toward it and feeling hopeful about it. And then, so in that first session, I'll also walk people through all the decisions they need to make for the court paperwork. Not all of them, but I step by step, I go through. And for some people, that takes a long time, and they might only tackle a few of the topics in the first session, enough decisions for, say, half of the parenting agreement. And then they continue in the next session. Other people, they make it through fairly quickly through the parenting decisions, and then they get into some of the financial parts, the asset division or debt division. And then they just continue that in the next session. So I'd say most people probably end up doing 3 sessions, but sometimes it's fewer. Sometimes if they're having a hard time working together, or they just move a little more slowly, then it might be 4 or 5 sessions.
Yeah, and it's great that's offered. Just take your time through it, because I think that a lot of mistakes are made when everyone's rushing.
Yeah.
There's different parts of divorce too. Like, I feel the emotional divorce has to happen first, and really sort of grieve that process in order for the legal and financial divorce to then take place in a rational way.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
when the
Right.
couples are separating, there's typically one who's more supportive of the split, you know, and so they've probably been grieving or processing this for quite some time, and the other one is a little bit behind. So sometimes it takes a while, I even find, to just get to that place where both of them are ready to be in front of a mediator and not emotionally tied to certain things, or even emotionally triggered by the sight of each other on the screen, right? Sometimes it can take quite a bit of time to process all of that.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think you're right that there's that emotional component too. And I think you know each does have to be in a certain place, and then that's where you as a divorce coach can help them get in the right place, or know if they're in the right place to start, because that's not something that we would do at mediation. Yeah, I think there is, you know, a little bit of overlap with emotional stuff, like they'll be talking about difficult times in the past quite often, and that, you know, there's a little bit of understanding that comes from that. But of course that's not our main focus. So it's good to be able to kind of process that a little bit before you go into mediation. That certainly can help a lot.
Yeah, at least a little bit, or learn how to compartmentalize. I mean, the emotional side of the divorce will take years for some. So it's understandable that it's just not like, okay, close the door and let's finalize this. But it's, learning how to, I think, separate it and now change your story of divorce into more focus on the business portion of divorce. And how we're going to rationally and amicably and reasonably fairly move through the process. So when coaching company, a practice where I support clients going through the divorce process, either pre, during, or post-divorce, really helping them, guide them through this process. Because I think initially everyone thinks when you go through divorce, the first call you need to make is to a lawyer. When in actual fact, it should be to a divorce coach. Because I can help navigate the process in terms of what type of divorce they want, set them up with some really vetted professionals that will support them along the way, and then really think about what it is that they want moving forward, and not spend the tens of thousands of dollars that your lawyer will end up charging you right off the bat. When a couple comes to you, what can they expect to walk away with at the end of their mediation with you? Meaning, did you guys work on a separation agreement, parenting plan? Like, what is all included by the end of it?
Yeah. So they will hopefully have come to agreement on everything, and I will. And but even if they haven't, you know, I'll give them a summary of everything they've agreed to. And you know, for filing for divorce, assuming they came to agreement, then I will do all that paperwork for them. So they come away with that set of paperwork. So it's, you know, it can be a dozen forms or so, and which they can then print out and submit to the court for the filing.
Right. Okay. So it can be complicated or easy depending on what they've agreed to. And let's say a couple walks away and one of them's decided that they don't want that in their agreement anymore. They've changed their mind, or they want to change it. How do they go about coming back to the table?
Yeah. Quite often, when that happens, someone will say, well, you know, I thought about such and such that we agreed to, but I don't want to do that anymore. I realize that's not going to work. So then I suggest that they propose to the other person that they meet in mediation again to discuss it. And usually people do. Occasionally they'll just talk it through themselves.
That's
And
great. Yeah.
they can tell me we changed it. I'll just, you know, make sure I verify that with both people. And if they have, then I can update that paperwork and get them that new set of paperwork.
Right. That's great. It sounds like that you do deal with a lot of clients who are able to have those conversations. And do you ever work with anyone who you just have to, it's just not going to work because there's too much tension and there's too much, I guess, disagreements?
Yeah, sometimes I think probably what is more common when it doesn't work is that one is kind of dragging their feet. You know, they're not really researching the information they need to. They're not upholding the temporary agreements. So they might have an agreement, like, for example, that you'll research how to split up such and such an account because that's in your name only, and only you can do that. And they just don't do it, and they don't provide the information. So then, unfortunately, the other person is stuck and really can't move forward. So it's really if they're just not participating. That's the real problem. As far as it being too, like, really disagreeing on everything, I can't think of any time at the moment when I've had a divorce mediation that has just completely shut down because they couldn't even communicate.
Well, that's great, because that also shows a success rate for you as a mediator to keep it flowing in the right direction. But I think that sometimes it can be stalemate, or maybe parties are coming to the table for mediation expecting to have that third party justify or validate why they're stuck on a certain point, and that's not how it happens, or that's not where it happens. And I think that I encourage my clients, if you're going to mediation, you need to be open and ready to compromise and listen to each other. There has to be some give and take. If you're going in saying, this is as far as I'm going to go, well, the outcome might not be that agreeable, because both of you are in this, not just one party.
Yeah, totally. I think flexibility is really one of the main factors for success, and that's not just flexibility in giving on your disagreement. That's certainly helpful, but it's also flexibility in your thinking. So just being able to accept ideas initially that you might reject or that feel threatening, and just to start shaping those and providing counter proposals, and just working with it. So if you can be flexible in your thinking, that can really go a long way.
Yeah,
in mediation.
Absolutely. And then just being creative. I think you can be creative with how you come to the table and split things up. I met this other great mediator, and he had this great metaphor using an orange. Maybe the orange doesn't have to be split down the middle, but maybe you want the inside and I want the peel. And so figuring out what it is about this that you both need, and how can you make it work for both of you. So instead of splitting that orange down the middle and then half of it's unusable because the other person didn't want, they couldn't use it anymore because they needed all of the peel. So it was just an interesting way to think about it. And I think that people come to the table thinking everything is split down the center, but it doesn't necessarily have to go that way, depending on how you can be creative.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And in mediation, we talk about interests and positions, and position is I want the orange, but the interest is I want to bake a recipe that uses the peel.
Yeah, right.
And so so that's what that mediators try to help people do, is understand the interests on the other side, because once you understand those, then you can get so much more creative, because if your position is I need X $1,000, then, and that's not acceptable to the other person, that's hard to work with. You might just be stuck on that dollar amount. But if you understand that the person's real interest is being able to afford to live somewhere, afford a house, and that's their real
close
concern.
To the kids' school or something,
Yeah,
be a bit more than what they had anticipated. But I think you come to the table with what are your non-negotiables, and then what are you willing to bend on a little bit.
Yeah. That can just makes it so much easier for problem solving. And if people get really stuck, then sometimes I'll just tell people, give some ideas of what I've seen work for some people. I try to leave that toward the end, because it's best if they figure out if they initiate the idea, and because then it's going to be more appropriate for them. But if they're really roadblocked, then I'll say, well, have you thought about this or that?
Right. Yeah, well, that's great. And I know that your mediation practice, Accord Mediation, is online mostly at this time, right?
Right.
Are you able to work with any clients over US? Are you able to work with clients in Canada, or what are you have any limitations around that?
Not really. Yeah. So I can work pretty much anywhere. And in some states it might be that I can't create the paperwork for them, but I can help them talk through all the issues
Mhm.
and come to agreement on the parenting aspect and the asset division as well. So yeah, I can help them work through that.
I love it. I love that you are, available to help those people really work out those issues. And it sounds like it's an incredibly affordable way to at least even start the process, even if in the event it wasn't, they weren't able to finalize everything. It's great for you to offer this place, the safe place where they can come to the table, really discuss their needs and wants, and find some common ground. So I think that that's what you're offering is fantastic. And to be able to be in this environment over, virtually, I think this is one of the silver linings of the pandemic, is being able to reach people all over the
Yeah.
continent, really, and offer the support, the unique support that everyone might need at specific times in their lives, like divorce.
Yeah. Yeah. People have, I think we're a little hesitant at first to consider doing divorce mediation over Zoom, but since it was, it's basically had to be done by video conference over the last year or so, people have gotten a lot more comfortable with it, and they see, oh, it does work.
Yeah, it can work, right? It definitely can
Yeah.
work as long as everyone's willing to give it a try.
Right. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Erik. I love this conversation, and I love
Yeah.
that
Thank
you're
you.
available for mediation for people struggling through divorce. And if mediation is right for them, then you're definitely a great option for them. So
Yeah.
thank
Thank you. Yeah. It was good talking with you.
you. You too. Coaching company, a practice where I support clients going through the divorce process, either pre, during, or post-divorce, really helping them, guide them through this process. Because I think initially everyone thinks when you go through divorce, the first call you need to make is to a lawyer, when in actual fact it should be to a divorce coach, because I can help navigate the process in terms of what type of divorce they want, set them up with some really vetted professionals that will support them along the way, and then really think about what it is that they want moving forward, and not spend the tens of thousands of dollars that your lawyer will end up charging you right off the bat. Divorce